A warm, warm welcome to all of you who made it here over the bridge and into the right and then to the left and so far here at beautiful Pembroke College. It makes me really happy, truly delighted to see you making your way here today in this beautiful weather and join us for the Fernando Lecture 2025. My name is Mette Morsing and I am the director of the Smith School and I'm also professor of business sustainability. As you will know, the Fernando Lecture was established to honor Adrian Fernando, who was the COO of Eco Securities, a company conceived to tackle climate change by using market mechanisms to properly price the environment. The goal of this lecture series is to foster discussion of the role of business and economics in solving the world's environmental challenges. And I could think of no more prominent management scholar to come here and join us today than Professor Tima Bansal from Ivey Business School in Canada, who's also a guest professor here at Oxford University for this term. Before I introduce you, Tima, I would just say a few words about the choice of the theme for today and the role of the business school and why we chose this specific theme for today. Because as we know, the business school is shaping global economies. It is innovating industries. It is developing leadership and ethics, agendas, norm sets for how we at our institutions train future leaders and driving in helping to drive entrepreneurship, oftentimes and certainly at Oxford University, also practically establishing incubation and different kinds of ways of helping our students and also our researchers to drive entrepreneurship. And also the business school is connecting global networks, serving as a partner with public sector, with civil sector society, agents from society to actually drive different kinds of agendas. But also importantly, the business school is actually educating, and this is UNESCO statistics, is educating 30% of all university students globally. 30%, that is 70 million students on an annual basis come out with a degree in management, business, law, or economics. So it matters what we bring into the classrooms. It matters the kind of research that underpins the teaching and the knowledge that is debated in our classrooms at the business schools. It matters what methods, what frameworks, and what models, but also what values are brought into the classrooms. And for example, if climate is not on the agenda, if it is not in the curriculum, if it is not brought into the examination of our students, then students are not likely to engage with this matter. For example, we have research showing how some students are actually become out more cynical and more cynically distanced to climate if climate is presented as lesson number 14 towards the end of the term. And by the way, we don't really have time to go through that. And by the way, you're not examined in this subject matter. Students will not be inclined to engage pro-socially, pro-environmentally with the matter. So in a world right now, in a situation of today, 2025, we can anticipate that it might be even more difficult to bring climate to the classrooms, to our students. So I can think of no more important matter to debate today, and I look very much forward, Tima, to your lecture here with us in a moment. Before I present Tima Bansal, Professor Tima Bansal for you, I would like to welcome you, Pedro, to the floor here, and for you, Pedro Moura Costa, to talk a little bit about the background for this wonderful Adrian Fernando Lecture. Please.
Thanks, Mette. It's a pleasure to have all of you here to the latest of this lecture series that we created about 9 years ago or so. As an honor to my former colleague Adrian Fernando, who was worked alongside me in this company called Eco Securities, here in Oxford. Adrian he joined us in the late 2000s to be a director in charge of more than 500 people in more than 35 countries around the world, working all with environmental finance, climate change mitigation, and so on. After a long battle against cancer, Adrian finally succumbed to the disease around 10 years ago. In fact, I was talking to his wife, Caroline, who said that it's actually next month is the anniversary of his death. So when he passed away, a group of us at Ecosecurities decided to create this lecture series to honor him and to continue to promote the kinds of discussions that we were having in the boardroom and among ourselves at the time, which was matters that related to environmental finance, what role it can have to tackle environmental challenges, in particular greenhouse gas mitigation and climate change. Nothing more appropriate to have this lecture hosted here in the Smith School for the entrepreneurship or enterprise, actually, and the environment, given that this was really the gist, the core of what we're trying to do. And I'm also very honored to be a business fellow of the school now and continue to be involved in all these discussions that take place here. We're very grateful to that, both for being a fellow, but for you to host that. And nothing more appropriate than this discussion today. I mean, the event today, what role can the business school play on solving the climate crisis, which is exactly what we wanted to hear, what we wanted to debate at that time. I feel a bit guilty and inappropriate. It would have been a lot more appropriate for my colleague and the guy who developed this, had the idea to develop this lecture series, Professor Bruce Usher in Colombia, because he's just beginning, he just launched this year an MSc on climate finance, and he would be delighted to be here and participate, meet with you and participate in this discussion. But this is all. I really thank you, Professor Mita, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation. So over to you, Mita.
No, thank you so much, Pedro. And I also would like to thank Ernesto Fernando, your Adrian's brother, and also Catherine, Adrian's wife, for you actually coming here and supporting today by your presence. I'm very, very happy for you to be here. And now to you, Professor Tima Bansal. I'm very honored to introduce you. It's not the first time I'm introducing you, but I'm always very happy to introduce you. And you are the professor and Canada Research Chair of Business Sustainability at the Ivey Business School, as I said, in Canada. And you have been investigating sustainability-related issues for more than 30 years. And for those of us who are old enough to remember back 30 years ago, we know that was a time where sustainability and the climate change debate was not really en vogue. It was not really something that was believed to be something the business schools should continue to engage with. It might even be a fad. But you were there very early on, Tima, and you have been publishing continuously, steadily, and at a high volume in some of the best journals in the world, in management scholarly journals. And you have also served on the boards, served as the good steward you are to help others, young scholars and senior scholars, to publish our stuff in these journals as well. And not only that, you have also, and I have a lot of respect for that, you have also engaged in practice. You have actually founded two influential organizations, the Network for Business Sustainability, which many of us are members of, and which connects researchers with businesses around the world, as well as Innovation North, which is another organization that helps companies reimagine innovation through systems thinking. And beyond that, you also are a chair in a number of different organizations, and of course, you and I were working together in the United Nations, where we were working together on the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education, and you continue to be the chair of that organization and doing an amazing job there. So a warm welcome to you, Tima, here to the stage.
Thank you, Meta. I'm afraid that might be the highlight of the talk. It's hard to beat that. I also really want to thank Pedro for initiating these talks, for Ernesto, for Catherine, and for Sarah to be here in memory of Adrian's 10-year anniversary. And then friends and colleagues of the Smith School, the Said, and others. So I'm going to start by, my map just tells me there's an update expected. Okay, to start here. Now, I'm a Canadian, as Meta said, and so I thought this is a School of Geography. I've got to show you my geography, right? And so, of course, this is Canada. It's a separate country from the US, in case anybody's wondering. But we do live, I live in London, Ontario, which is somewhere between Toronto and Detroit. And you'll see that's actually quite far south. So very proud of the location that we are. And what makes, I think, this partly interesting, my geography, is that this is London, and it's not to be confused with the other London, but we do have the Thames River, and we do have all the streets that you would probably have in, well, not all the streets, but some of the major streets. So London really has difficulty with its identity. But then not only that, we have Oxford County, which is this red square. And just in case you want to know, you can visit Cambridge while you're there. And if you really want, you can go to Stratford, which is upon Avon. And we also have Paris nearby. Brussels, if you really want to visit that as well, and dare I say, Washington. So there is something really quite powerful about this very central location of Canada. But the other thing that makes this geography really interesting is that it's a migratory path for birds. And so in the spring, when the birds are coming through the north, it's really cool because along here, the eastern seaboard, this is their main migratory path. And this place that they stop to get across the Great Lakes is it's a peninsula near where I live. And so it gets funneled through, the birds funnel through London, Ontario. And so I wake up in the morning, I love May, because the birds are so loud. They're horny at this time, right? And so they're mating, and there's such diversity of birds. And so it's a thing that wakes me up in the morning in May and June. And then I wonder, what would happen if there were no birds? What happens if if it was all silent? And that takes me to the start and the title of my talk, which is Silent Storm. But it reminds me of when we experience the birds, of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. Her story began in 1958. Her friend Olga Huckings wrote to Rachel Carson and described how a mosquito plane was flying overhead and spread DDT throughout the town. Her friend Olga discovered 3 dead birds that day, and another 3 birds the next day in the bird bath, and then the next day saw a robin fall out of a tree. So Olga writes to Rachel, "For those of us who stand helplessly on the tortured earth, it is intolerable." In 1962, Carson published Silent Spring. She argued that pesticides continued to be used unchecked would fundamentally remove birdsong. It was a book that fundamentally changed our relationship with nature. In Nature, Carson wrote, "Nothing exists alone." Rachel was not an activist. She was a marine biologist. Her writing had an immediate and profound effect. The public was shocked and moved, They began questioning government policies, grassroots movements emerged. But the response from the chemical industry was swift and brutal. The chemical industry had funded scientists to discredit her findings. They called her hysterical and unqualified. This is a spokesperson for the chemical industry, and he claimed, if man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and the diseases and the vermin would once again inherit the earth. You can imagine that this is also the experiences that we're facing with climate change today and the parallels that we experience. But President Kennedy at that time listened. His Science Advisory Committee investigation largely validated Carson's claims. Within a decade, DDT was banned. They started the Environmental Protection Agency at that time, which is now currently being dismantled, and it awakens people's interests in the natural world. It was backed by science, by conviction, courage. Rachel Carson's voice changed the industry, changed history. So let's fast forward to today. I'm not going to talk about the climate crisis. We all in this room know the gravity of the climate crisis. We understand the urgency and the stakes. But I want to talk about another silence, and it's the silence of business schools. I'm going to show you some recent headlines I picked off the press in the last week. BP shareholders want it to make money, not climate policy. That's BBC. Reuters, Wells Fargo drops financial emissions target and ESG rethink. BlackRock's woke era is over. Subtext, asset manager has exited climate groups and eliminated diversity targets as it tries to end ESG controversy. Wall Street Journal. And of course, The Guardian, Florida Sugar Company's environmental claims are greenwashing, lawsuit says. Plaintiffs say Florida Crystals, which is the name of the company, farming method that blights minority neighborhoods belies its climate-friendly claims. And you can't help but ignore what's happening in the U.S. The U.S. just said, therefore, the United States rejects and denounces the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals and will no longer reaffirm them as a matter of course. Through all those headlines, through all that media, the question is, where are the business school academics? Not a single story talked about the business school academics' response. They talk about climate scientists, they talk about economists, political scientists, activists, and even celebrities. Yet business schools are noticeably absent from the discourse. About 7 years ago, I attended a conference at Wharton, and it was on climate change. The lineup included a lot of academics that some of you from the business school here would know. Climate change was not mentioned once at this conference. Instead, they talked about energy challenges, resource optimization. Climate change never crossed their lips. If organizations, the organizations I mentioned, are the primary culprits of climate change, shouldn't business school academics be at the table? So where are the business schools? Carl Weick, an organizational theorist, wrote in 1984, there is widespread agreement that social science research has done relatively little to solve social problems. So I went on this rabbit hole to see which business school academics were speaking in the popular press about the climate crisis, and it was really hard to find. So what does a good academic do? They check the fallible ChatGPT and say, what is the journalistic accounts on climate discourse? This is what ChatGPT tells me. While journalistic articles often highlight the integration of climate change topics into business school curricula and the roles academics play in shaping sustainable business practices, there is limited coverage of business school academics specifically discussing individual companies' contributions to climate change. Meta already mentioned that 66 million students go through higher education to learn business, economics, and law. So this is a graph that I was going to show to you, which I probably stole from one of Meta's slides. But that's 30% of all graduates. We have an opportunity to influence in business schools to reshape the discourse of businesses because they are businesses' future leaders. They will lead corporations, shape economic policy, and make decisions that will either accelerate or mitigate climate change. If there is a place that business schools can make a difference, it's through education. And yet, the evidence is not on our side. I'll show you a bunch of studies here. There's a study by Venkat Midley in 2003. He says that he finds that the values of graduating business school students shift from being others-oriented to becoming more self-oriented after they leave the business school. In all sorts of games, whether they are the prisoner's dilemma, the ultimatum game, the threshold game, public goods game, solidarity game, these are all games that assess self-interest. Business people and economists are shown to act more in their self-interest than in others' interests relative to people in other professions. US and Danish businesses, led by business managers with business degrees, pay employees less than non-business managers, yet with no difference in output, profits, or employment growth. As well, non-business managers are shown to more likely share profits with employees. That was a study that was done by the recent Nobel Prize winner in economics. I'm going to struggle with his name, but Acemoglu, Hay, and Lemaire. So that's a recent study. And then there's one that was done by Denny Miller and Zhu. U.S. businesses led by business managers are more likely to engage in short-term tactics such as managing earnings and restricting R&D investments than those led by non-business managers. This does not paint a good picture. So this is a cartoon. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So what's the problem with business schools? Why aren't they involved? Henry Mintzberg, Canadian academic at McGill, he says after the 2007 financial crisis, the financial crisis was a monumental failure of management. Business schools are a significant part of the problem. So I want to ask you, this is the moment of audience participation. What's the problem with business schools? Anybody? Just shout it out, and I'll repeat it. Focus on profits, absolutely. Anything else? The sources of funding are? Businesses. So there's a conflict of interest. Lawrence? Sorry, the what? Ethical claims are not discussed before financial claims. Climate change becomes the very last thing that you discuss. Ethics are the very last thing to discuss. Yeah? The way that they're ranked. FT rankings become very important because we want students to come to our school because schools are so expensive. And so the rankings become central, and the rankings don't rank social responsibility or sustainability as much as they would rank, let's say, change in wages. Okay? So students want to go into finance instead. Now, if the answer to this question is that we need better curriculum to get them to students to stop thinking about profits or start to get them to think about ethics before finance, then if it's just about curriculum, then you would think that we would have a lot more curriculum, which is exactly what's happening. So there is a boom in curriculum. We're seeing a lot more core courses in sustainability and corporate social responsibility. We're seeing a lot, and a core course means that every student has to take it. We're seeing a lot more electives in these issues. We're also seeing some certificates and some programs in sustainability. We're even seeing some schools committed to it, including Presidio Graduate School in California, including the Business School at the University of Vermont, and the University of Exeter's Business School. So there are real commitments that are being made. But I'm going to share now a personal story that I experienced. I teach sustainability along with my colleagues in the core course. So I co-teach with marketing, with strategy, with management science, and I'm hoping that the students will then be able to see how sustainability weaves through everything. And so when I teach in finance, co-teach in finance, we will talk about net present value of buying a coal mine. And then I will illustrate after my finance colleague talks about net present value, I'll say, let's extend the time frame. What happens? And when you extend the time frame, then a lot more issues come into view. So at the end of my last class, I start teaching in March. At the end of my last class in August, because it's 10 classes over a period of that, over the core period, I had a student come up to me afterwards. And he says to me, Tima, do you remember we had a conversation on the first day about how excited I am about this course? I said, of course I remember. And on the first day, I do have a lot of excitement for the content I teach. And then he says to me, you know, you're really brave. And I said, brave? I'm teaching the stuff I like. How can I be brave? And then he says, well, you know, all that chatter that's in the private chat rooms for the MBA students, there's a lot of discomfort with this content. And I thought, really? I did not know. And so how is it that I went from this period of deep excitement, 4 months later, there's all this pushback? Something happens. And it wasn't just last year. It was the year before, and the year before, and the year before. I had a student chase me down the hall afterwards, and she says to me, you know, the problem isn't that we don't have enough that we have too much content. She says we don't have enough content, so we need more. So is it a question of content? Adding more curriculum may inform us more about climate change, more about ethics, more about corporate social responsibility, but there is very little evidence to show that executives make decisions differently. So the curricula changes begs the question, did students enroll in these courses because they're already believing in climate change? Or are they enrolled in the courses because they want to change their mind? And maybe they come in with ideas beforehand, they don't change their mind. So this is a graph I wanted to show you, or a study I wanted to show you. This is a study published in the Journal of Finance and Accounting. The author finds that students who underwent ethics education demonstrated less ethical behavior compared to their counterparts who did not receive such education. And so the question is, do we need more content? I'm going to argue, this is my thesis, this is my main thesis. Business schools are addressing the climate crisis with content closely tied to the existing business paradigm, focused on, organizational or individual performance. So we are adding more content in a paradigm that is already contradicting what we do. I argue that business schools need to shift the focus back from theory-based disciplines to focus more on problems. The issue is if I go into the classroom and teach about climate, but every one of my colleagues for 4 months is telling them about individual and organizational performance, what I tell them about climate will not make a difference. Ultimately, we're pushing the rock uphill. So to make this argument, I want to start with the formation of business schools. Why were business schools first formed? The first business school was ESCP. It was built in 1819 in Paris to teach practical business skills such as accounting, commerce, and law. The first U.S. school was Wharton, and it was in 1881, and Joseph Wharton funded the school to provide useful knowledge. These institutions emerged during the Industrial Revolution. They were meant to professionalize management and advance industrialization. They were built on Adam Smith's philosophy, the invisible hand. Now remember, Adam Smith wrote the theory of moral sentiments. He argued for markets, specialization, and the division of labor, which was important for economic prosperity. And I'll keep coming back to that. He wrote, by pursuing his own interest, he, this is the common man, frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. So basically, if you follow your self-interest, you will care about society's interests. But Adam Smith wasn't asking people to be self-interested. He was asking for the economic engine that would put food on the table. So business schools were initially founded as pragmatic institutions focused on building practical knowledge that could be applied to real-world problems. But something happened after World War II, the emergence of irrelevance. The Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, in the 1950s argued that business schools needed to have more rigor. They needed to have more theory, and they needed to have more analytical thinking. These recommendations dovetailed at the same time with the AACSB, which argued for clearer academic standards and disciplinary structures. So, in response, business schools started to recruit heavily from economics, from psychology, from sociology, and they established the disciplinary journals, and we established tenure, and then with tenure became this hurdle about theory. This was later reinforced by business schools, as was said earlier, with business school rankings. And so all of a sudden the rankings now are rewarding, once again, theory and this ability for students to make a lot more money. Okay. So now we have lost our ability to connect with the problem and are more the engine of students that just make more money. So this created two problems. The first problem is that we became theoretically grounded and abstracted away from reality. We started to explain classes of phenomena rather than actually being able to explain real-world problems. The second thing is that we committed fallacies between levels of analysis, and that's where I'm going to go next. But we took the insights from our root disciplines, applied them to business, and then we thought that we were solving the problems. And that is at the fundamental the fundamental place of my argument. Okay, so why business schools lost their climate voice, and I'm going to argue that there's cross-level fallacies. Okay, so we know if you're in geography or if you're in business that there are levels of analysis. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and I apologize because I'm going to go deep into some theory that probably I don't need to, but I do this for two reasons. One is that I don't want to leave you with this belief that business schools are evil. I think that what has happened in business schools is that we have lost our way, that we didn't know what had happened, and it was inadvertent. So that's one thing, is that my colleagues are really trying to do what's right, but we have to think about the problem differently. The second one is that until we know the problem, will we know the solution? And so if we just add more content, it's not going to change the way that people research or what we teach students, then I think that we have to understand the problem differently. So in the way that we think about these problems, at the very top level are climate issues. Those are planetary issues. They're macro. Then we have nation states that fit within that. And then we have organizations. And then we have individuals. And we have actors that are at the individual level of analysis, the organizational, and sometimes the nation state. Okay, so now I'm reworking this picture. And what we have here then is societal and planetary issues. And then we have the disciplines that fell beneath that. And so we know that economics dealt with trying to put, this is Adam Smith, trying to build economic prosperity. And by building economic prosperity, we would all do better. And so their whole intention was to make our lives better. So psychology, same thing, was how can we make people's lives better? Industrial engineering, same idea. And so then what comes after that are a number of disciplines. Strategy was born from economics. We have finance and we have accounting that all came from a very strong disciplinary orientation. Psychology bred marketing, it bred leadership, and industrial engineering, we see operations. What we have after that, though, is that the main ambition of strategy is to encourage companies to grow. That is their main objective. So they have taken economics and said, what is it that we want to do in business strategy is to motivate companies to grow. There has been now a leap in logic, taking economic arguments, drawing them down. What do we do in finance? We value organizations because we want to maximize value, and we discount the future. In sustainability, we want future generations to live as well as we do and not discount them. What do we do in counting? We count and we control. Once again, we are now orienting ourselves to the microcosms of what can we do for ourselves. What do we do in marketing? Sell. We want to do more and more selling. What do we do in leadership? We care about me. I want to be the leader. What do we care about operations? To cut most efficiency. So we want to get rid of the people, we want to get rid of the excess. And then what do we do in business schools is that we build individual skills that will help us achieve those. This is a problem because we took all of those assumptions, those good assumptions at the macro level of analysis, and then we pushed them down into the organizational level of analysis. So what those assumptions were at the macro level, I'm just going to use economics because I was trained as an economist. Those assumptions at the macro level are productivity and performance. We assume rational self-interest, behavior, opportunism, and that is to prevent moral hazard, adverse selection, free riding, because we want good behavior at a societal level so that we can be productive, and in being productive, we can put more food on the table. Okay, so then what do we do in business schools? We take those assumptions, which is at the macro level, doesn't require every organization to be that way. In fact, we don't even have to have one person be that way at the macro level. All you have to say is that society behaves as if. And just so you know the equivalency, if you assume that everybody is that the average person is 6 feet tall, not one person has to be 6 feet tall, right? That's a simple analogy. But we can say that the average is this way so that we can model it. So what do we do in business schools? We take those same assumptions and we apply that to business. And now every organization should be that way. And then we apply it to individuals. And now all individuals have those attributes. So what was in economics to avoid free riding, to avoid adverse selection, to avoid moral hazard, has now been attributed to lower levels of analysis, and we did that inadvertently. We did that because we went from being very practically based to being very theory-based, and we got lost in our theories. We shifted the levels of analysis. That is called by statisticians an ecological fallacy. Yes, the words are very useful for our context as well, but it is a statistical concept. Is when you take attributes of the population and then you apply it to the individual. Okay. The equivalency for that is that it's like saying that to optimize GDP or productivity, all firms need to operate at optimal performance. It's like saying that in a team, we want every individual in the team to be aggressively pursuing their goals. It's this argument of trickle-down economics. We assume that if the economy performs well, everyone will be better off. Yet, there's plenty of evidence to show that if the economy performs well, and some people get wealthy, they get wealthier, and then they get more power, and as they have more power, they will become more wealthy. We are seeing higher levels of income inequality than we've ever seen before. And so on the one hand, you could say that trickle-down economics works, but on the other hand, it doesn't. I want to offer a business example. In economics, at the macro level of analysis, Joseph Schumpeter, in 1942, argued for modern day. It was the father of modern day entrepreneurship. He argued for creative destruction and the role of entrepreneurs in innovation at the macro level of analysis. And that would drive economic growth and development. We now teach these principles in business schools, and we celebrate people like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. So what does Mark Zuckerberg do? He embodies the ideas of entrepreneurship. He says we need to move fast and break things. And right now, we are seeing the result of moving fast and breaking things in the US. Facebook's relentless pursuit of growth and engagement has repeatedly broken democratic processes, privacy norms, and mental health safeguards. Cambridge Analytica paid Facebook considerable money to get data from 87 users without their consent. That was all in the name of entrepreneurship, taking Joseph Schumpeter's ideas about innovation and entrepreneurship and taking it to the individual organizational level of analysis. Now, if that's not bad enough, what we do is one step further, is that we have committed an atomistic fallacy, which operates in reverse. We apply these individual level characteristics now, if you can imagine, of being self-interested and opportunistic, and apply them to macro level issues. So, even if each organization optimizes its environmental performance incrementally, the collective impact may still exceed planetary boundaries. So if you and you and you and everyone in this room consumes less, if we have more people, though, we'll ultimately just crash the planet. Okay, so then we have this atomistic fallacy, and we can see this most evidently with circular economy and net zero commitments. Firms that seek net zero or zero waste will produce more or less waste and smaller stuff. So then we have these little electronics that are fused together that cannot be taken apart. So AirPods, I have my AirPods, small, tiny, gorgeous, but they are glued together. And so when the battery goes, the AirPods go. That's after 2 or 3 years. And there's nothing you can do about them. And so what they do is they shred them, and the batteries themselves then become a fire hazard, and they get thrown away, and there's nothing that can be done. Let's go back to Facebook. Cambridge Analytica was accused of not just harvesting the data, but using the data to influence elections. Started at the organizational level, now it's influencing the macro level. Zuckerberg's philosophy created an orientation that prioritized speed and scale over careful consideration of societal impacts. We know that the impact on teen health because of Facebook has been disastrous. When individual actions scale up, it often becomes a tragedy of the commons. So then these fallacies are even worse when they operate together. And business schools are at the heart of it. So what we do is that we have increases in corporate sustainability initiatives, yet global emissions continue to rise. Businesses continue to overshoot safe carbon levels, even though individuals want to change things. Macro-level statements or even regulations cannot overcome the micro-level incentives and behaviors, especially when micro-level actors gain power. I want to repeat that the issue of which I'm speaking about cannot be fixed by more CSR content, because ultimately we've just created the problem inadvertently. We need a new way of seeing the problem. This is what happens when we scale up. And we know that. One company uses plastic, more and more companies do so. So what's the answer? Returning to problem-focused business research and education. And what I mean by that is that business schools were there to solve problems. We became theory-focused. We lost touch of what we were supposed to do. I say let's go back to problem solving. So how can business schools gain their climate voice? First, I think they need to embrace systems thinking. Recognizes the interconnectedness from actors and recognizes different scales. And so at the Clarendon Lecture, which I gave in early February, we talked about the importance of interconnectedness, whereas in economic modeling, we assume independence. At least in systems thinking, we recognize that we have relationships, not just among ourselves, but with nature. And so I think systems thinking has to be at the heart of a business school. I think that we need to recognize the complexity of problems and integrate appropriately. We talk about climate change. We talk about biodiversity loss. We talk about teen health and suicide. We talk about financial wellness. We talk about AI and ethics. Those are all different problems. Let's not treat them all the same way. So let's be serious about understanding problems and their differences. And this is just a start at that, but I think that as the degree of complexity increases with a problem, we also need to integrate more with people who can solve the problem. If you have a technical problem, it's an engineering problem. You can be working within your own discipline. If it's more complex, you need to coordinate, you need to collaborate, and it's the most complex, you need people to work towards identifying the problem together and finding solutions together. Going back to this, how can business schools gain their climate voice? We have to start anchoring on macro problems. If I ran a business school, I would have the first week where we talked about those macro problems. Why are you in business education? And I would end the program talking about the macro problems so that students didn't become analytical thinkers. They were forced to go in and out of the macro problem so they know why they're there. They don't lose touch with who they are. I would reframe macro problems meaningfully to organizational levels. And so that's not about climate change being financially profitable. We did a project with farmers. We couldn't get them to focus on climate change because they just have to plant seeds and harvest, and their days are hard. But once we talk to them about soil health, which is a clear indicator of climate change, clearly related, they take notice. We need to think about the problems that people face and reframe those problems to the organizational and individual levels of analysis, but let's not lose sight of the macro problem. Another thing that I would do is I would start to build individual skills. Not skills of leadership, not skills that say that I can stand apart from everybody else, skills that offer critical thinking, that offer deep listening, that offer boundary spanning so I can work with others to co-create solutions, and that offer facilitation, because at the heart of it, business schools should be the interface between the other academic disciplines as an applied area and business. So then we can start to shape the discourse and the dialogue. Business schools need to break their silence on macro issues. There's been huge progress in the last 30 years. I graduated from the University of Oxford, and I returned 30 years ago with my DPhil, and I return here now, and I am in awe. I'm in awe of the colleagues that are in this room. I'm in awe of what's happening at the Smith School and the curriculum that they have. It's very problem-focused. But this isn't enough. We need to take inspiration from Rachel Carson, who spoke out at a point when it was really hard to do so, and for business school academics to reform, not just add on, but reform business school education so that we start to think about the problems and not just the answers. What if every business school requires students to work on climate? What if tenure decisions considered impact on pressing global problems, not just counting publications in target journals? And what if business schools saw themselves not as guardians of disciplines, but as catalysts for solving humanity's greatest challenges? There's a revolution that's going on. I think that we need to take that one step further. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Tima, for this fabulous talk here for us today. And I would love to invite the audience to have a few moments, a few questions, comments, input to you, Tima. And I have a long list of questions to sort of ask you if nobody else wants to. Maybe we should sit ourselves over here. Just for a few minutes before we close. When I was listening to your talk here, I was sort of thinking, again, you know, I have the privilege right now to lead the Oxford Smith School, and in particular the last slide you showed with the business school, sort of old school, if I could say, and the business school, new school. I was sort of thinking it almost was my own transition from my 20 plus years in a business school setting and my now sort of re-emergence in the Smith School context in that kind of co-creation, that kind of problem-driven research that is being done that we do at the Smith School, and the complexity that is engaged with. But I would love to ask you, because we've sort of emerged outside the business school and not inside the business school. So how do you see the business school developing for the future? What needs to be done? What is the sort of the hindrance? Why doesn't it happen fast enough, or in many places, in many business schools? What can we do?
I think the challenge is that we are, at the more macro level, we are at victims of the institutions in which we're embedded. So whether it's the FT rankings, or whether it's our tenure hurdles, or whether it's the publications. But I don't think that that's, I think that that's the lack of vision. If we had a dean at a business school, at a major business school, that said, we're going to tackle these problems, we're going to really take them seriously, and we're going to rethink our curriculum, the changes that I'm recommending aren't really that hard. And then you think about the fact that business schools would be solving problems, and that they could put that on their websites or whatever, that they are part of the conversation. They are changing the conversation. I think that they would have other ways of funding what they do that are different from the way that they're doing it now. And it would inspire such a generation of academics. I think there's so many people, young academics now, junior academics, they're wanting to make a difference, that want impact, and they see the world as being separate. Either they have impact or they publish. It doesn't have to be that way. We can actually solve problems, and in solving those problems, we can publish. One of my goals before I retire is to demonstrate how we can publish with action research and publish in our top journals while also tackling these problems.
Thank you. Juliane, please.
Yeah, thanks for this thought-provoking lecture.
Please say who you are and where
Sorry,
you're from.
I'm Juliana Reinecke, Professor of Management Studies at Said Business School. So at Said, we've introduced a climate bootcamp for all our incoming over 320 MBA students for the first time, and they were overwhelmingly positive about the experience. With Bettina, we just introduced a new elective, Transforming Organizations, and 80 students signed up. So I think there's a lot of interest from that we see from our students to learn about climate change. I think what I feel what we're often struggling with is to show them where the opportunities lie. That it's not kind of all doom out there, but this is also something where they can project themselves into the future as kind of climate leaders themselves. And and I want to connect this to the theme of the Adrian Fernando lecture, because I was wondering, how are we then teaching these topics? And now coming to the theme of Adrian Fernando, trying to tackle climate change by using market mechanisms to price the environment, is this kind of one way of how we can use the skills that we have at the environment and kind of internalizing these externalities from an economic perspective? Or I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on kind of the how of how we bring back the climate voice into the business school.
That's an excellent question.
So Juliana, first of all, I want to acknowledge, I think what you are doing at Said and among your colleagues is truly exceptional. And so there's no question that I think that Said is taken some big steps because of the leadership that's been shown by some specific individuals. But then the point that I'm making is that it's one thing to do it in a climate week and in courses, but then if they're calculating net present value, and then they're counting and controlling, and then they're told in marketing to sell more stuff, and then they're told in operations to find efficiencies, that ultimately that voice is lost. And I think that as much as people care, it's inevitably their voices is muted, and then they become transformed again. So, is the answer internalizing externalities or pricing externalities? I think that the answer is no. And it goes back to a point I've made before, but does that mean that we start to price everything? And we start to price nature? What is the value of clean water? What is the value of clean air? What is the price of the last tree or the last whale? What is the price of our health? And I think that that's the slippery slope we fall into. I think that we need to not use price as a substitute for a system, because a system is ultimately relational and not price-worthy. When we start to focus on problems, then we start to get to the things that matter, like happiness, like good health, like birds. And so the problem is that the incrementalization, the pricing, I think the business school problems is the incrementalization of pricing. And that the answer is trying to just focus on solutions for problems. Does that answer? Yeah. There's more debate to have.
Can I, because we only have a few minutes, I would just love to hear a few comments. So Pedro first, and Annette,
Tima,
and then Mary and you.
Along the lines, I mean, what is the price of vanity? What's the price of narcissism? And probably zero. It's difficult to put a price there. But in spite of that, Mr. Zuckerberg that you mentioned created a multi-trillion-dollar business which has no revenue. How did he manage to do that? So that leads to the questions that you put. I mean, that we should change the way of thinking to problem solving and innovation. We need to think of new business models that can generate this $1 trillion out of something that has no revenue, doing something that is completely, to a large extent, useless for humanity and the globe. So how to get there?
Can I ask you, Pedro, to hand back to Annette? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make one more suggestion to your wonderful list.
Will you
say
who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. Annette Mikes. I'm also at the Said Business School, an associate professor of accounting. Accounting is a language, and I realize it suffers from the same problems that you described about other disciplines. Such constraining languages constrain moral imaginations as well of how the world could be better. They constrain problem definitions and the solution space. What I would advocate for also is a change of language that we use in business schools. So channeling in voices from humanities and other social sciences, enriching our language would also enrich moral imagination. And an example of that is that beautiful phrase that motivated Rachel Carson about standing helplessly on the tortured earth. Samantha Harvey writes about there is nothing beautiful about man's neurotic assault on the planet. This kind of language would actually motivate our students to step out of the confined language of externalities, which actually assume that what business does, this neurotic assault on earth, is nothing to do with them. And they have to understand it's part and parcel of the process that they are operating under. So how do we channel other languages in as a richer language? We can bring in literature, we can bring in other social sciences which have richer languages.
Thank you, Annette. I hope it's okay I pass on. I'm not expecting you to answer in depth everything, Tima. Please, Mary. And I'm so delighted, I just have to say I'm so delighted again to say that, you know, about 1 year ago, the Smith School and the Said School, we formed a partnership, and we're still working on it. And I'm so happy to see so many of our friends from Said Business School here today. Mary, you another one.
Hi, so I'm Mary Johnston-Louis. I am at Said Business School, and Annette, I think there should be more. There should be more here from the business school. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you, Tima, as well. I think I kind of wanted to cheer when you put up your analysis around the levels of analysis and how they get so confused. And I was not trained in a business school, so I came from a social sciences department and sort of crossed the Rubicon, right? And I did that because I was interested in the problems, right? And I was interested in the tools. And I wanted to think about that, I suppose, with you and with Meta in the room, because part of me, as I've spent time in the business school now for more than 10 years, is just wondering about the sort of validity of standalone business schools to do this task. And there is something about actually the institution of the school, which is meant to only study business, that I think maybe reinforces an even deeper misperception that probably is one of those logical jumps that you were talking about, which is that business is separate from society, right? And so for me, this is something that actually, if we don't start there, if we don't start from the idea that business impacts and depends on natural and social systems in order to create value, like that is a sort of fundamental definition, I do think it's really difficult for our students and for our research to identify those links. And so I think this is just a really important event, and I think there's a question for us around how do we do this in a business school that is actually institutionally kind of cosseted from a lot of the beautiful language, but also perhaps isn't taking account of the resources on which it depends. So maybe that's a question. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a comment.
Mary okay, sorry, yes. Yes.
Hi, my name's Jimmy, and I am also an alum of the business school, but also now based at the Smith School. So I am physically in both places, but also another name that you mentioned, which is I was formerly a professor at the Presidio Graduate School, as well as its predecessor, Bainbridge Graduate Institute. And talking about places that have integrated MBA and sustainability into the curriculum, I think building off of Juliana's comment, it's really difficult getting that mix correct of teaching the sustainability and teaching the core concepts of, and I think it's a question as well, is how to get that mix correct, because I think in the Presidio graduate school context, I think we erred on too much of the sustainability side without focusing on the core operations, the core skills that one expects to learn out of a business school, such that the students felt like there was a little bit too much elective content and not much of the core content that they expected coming out of the business school. So I think more of an observation that getting it right is a challenge of getting enough of that integration of climate and sustainability without so much that we lose also some of the fundamentals of business.
Thank you so much. If you could take that mic and somehow channel it down to Leo for a brief comment. Would you comment on, I was thinking of the Master of Sustainability we're teaching, and then I will pass it on over to you, and then back to you, Tima. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. I'm helping out lecturing on the Masters at the Smith School, which Sam leads. It's a fantastic program, and the kids all want jobs. They want jobs. This is the tough one. One question I've got is, to your point, that the business school is embedded in the rest of the world. How can the business school change itself if it needs to accommodate the rest of the world without having also changed the rest of the world? How can it manage when the systems are so set against it? How can it actually have that impact?
Thank you, Leo. Could you transport the up to you? Oh, you've got one. Thank you.
I smuggled myself in. I just wanted to quote Wittgenstein to say the limits of my language mean the limits of my world, because I think what Annette said is just so beautiful. Yeah.
This is wonderful. This is just like leading an Oxford dinner table. Thank you for making it so easy. Thank you.
Laura Crammer, I'm an associate fellow also at the business school. Right. So I think what I wanted to say has already really been covered, or it follows from what everyone else has been saying. And this is to simplify to an extent, but business schools, perhaps people within them and the people that come to them, are wanting the skills to succeed and to run a particular kind of organization. So it's the image I had in mind was what I think you're looking for. It's almost as if we need sort of human enterprise or human endeavor schools. Because as soon as you say a business school, immediately it's and I think the point that was made about the balance between sustainability and sort of core skills, it's core skills of a particular kind, and they're very valuable for a particular kind of organization, the company. But if we're going to consider these other problems, and it's almost as if you need two institutions which are doing two very different things, and then you need to integrate them. But there's that sense that what we're looking at are, we want to think about human endeavor, human enterprises first, and then one of them might be the businesses that we now have. And I think that's part of the dilemma that people, perhaps Leo is making, that people want to come to a business school to learn the skills to enable them to be successful in a certain kind of institution, certain kind of organization.
Thank you very much for this. I think we have a very final comment, and then over to you.
Thank you. So Carrie Lomas, I'm also SBS and Associate Fellow, so we've got lots of us here tonight because we all believe in the collaboration. One of the things that strikes me, and through all of the points, we're talking about this, forgive me for anybody that is younger, but we're talking about this from a lens of an older generation. And actually, I do have hope, those of you that have got teenagers or older children, that we're talking about it as having to change the world, whereas they're talking about it as the world that they want to live in and the world that they can create. The FT rankings is a great example. You know, my only deep conversation with Sumitra was, why don't we just pull out? And why don't we challenge the rankings and say that what you get as a salary is no longer the measure, but it has to be what difference you make in society. And Lawrence's point about, you know, are we trying to change the companies, and Juliana's points about everyone's about, do we have to change it outside in? Can we really change, as Leo said, the world that we live in? And I think we can, but I think they will. And I think our job is to not necessarily always frame it from where we are, but actually from where they are, and think about the businesses that they want to run, because instead of having to worry about human enterprise versus business, actually the businesses of the future need to be human enterprises.
Yes, I know. Okay, please, thank you so much for this comment. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm Christine Homolke. I also work in the Said Business School. And I work with Mary, Giovanni, and Sam on the Sustainable Business Program. That's a collaborative program between the Business School and the Smith School. And I've worked with Annette and Juliana in other capacities as well. So my question is, I think it's very hard to do this in isolation for one single business school. But what comes to mind is that there is this, let's call it coalition between the business schools. It's called, and I'm sure most of us would have heard about this, the Business Schools for Climate Leadership. And this was founded in 2029, back when our dean was then Dean Peter Tufano. And I was, in fact, part of the team supporting the dean when we were organizing the first webinar that we launched in 2029. And the founding members of this collective is Saïd Business School, Cambridge Judge, HEC Paris, INSEAD IMD. So these are really, you know, the biggest business schools and who have quite a, you know, a good gravitas in terms of making a change. So I guess what I would like to hear is, what do you think should be their focus at the moment to really get the needle moving as a collective?
Thank you so much for this last comment here from, okay, Sam, would you like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We need a Smith School voice, please.
That's on. Yeah, it is. So yeah, Sam Fankhauser from the Smith School. I'm mostly taking the microphone to say there are people from the Smith School in the audience. But I also have a question, and it sort of strikes me there's sort of two different theories of change, I guess you could call them. The course that we have in the Smith School, I guess, is catering towards the converted. So we have 700 people applying who are committed environmentalists, and they choose, and they think business is a way to sort of achieve their environmental objectives. The bit you're kind of talking about is people are committed business people, and you kind of want to explain to them that they can reach their objectives only by being environmentally aware. I'm just wondering whether you could comment about those two paradigms and which one is more successful.
Thank you so much, Sam. And now over to you, Tima.
I'm not going
to. We don't have like 1 hour more because the drink's waiting outside, but I would love you to reflect on some of this. There's a lot of comments, a lot of input, and you won't be able to answer it all, but please take it on.
So I won't take on everything. And I have to say that we in this room are the converted. And so there is a degree to which I don't have, you know, there's no antagonism. We need to get the others in the room. But I do have, let's say, a general comment. We can have the specific questions and answers over drinks. But the one about language, I just want to tackle what Lawrence and Annette said about the language being important. We were management studies when I was here 30 years ago. And then it became the business school when Saïd came. And there was something very different about that orientation when you're trying to build a professional class. And that it was when we moved to business, I think, that we changed it to being about money. And so I think that language piece is going to be central. But where I think we've gone wrong, if I was to try to sum that up in a fewer words, is that we got focused on the tools. We got focused on the way that we make then more money. And if business schools, let's say management studies, was formed as a professional class to make the world better because we needed to tackle problems, let's put that back to the center of what we do so the tools help us solve problems and we don't get lost in just using the tools to make more money. And so the problems should be what guide management studies, and we still learn the tools. I'm not dismissing the fact that accounting or strategy or operations offers really important tools, but they have to be for a purpose. That purpose has to be those macro level problems that we see, that we want our society to be better. And as soon as we start to be focused on the problems that we want to solve for a better society, then the tools, we will work together as a group to make society better. and we won't get lost in just making more money. And so I think that there is an answer, and I don't think it's that difficult. And I think that there will be celebrations of business schools that take this leadership, and whether it's BS4CL, or whether it's Said, or whether it's Smith on the outside of Said that leads that change. But I do think that this has to be the future, because right now we are, and someone already said this, we are already on this path that that business will no longer be able to survive other than a very, very wealthy few. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Tima, for this wonderful talk and for these reflections. And so again, I'm so happy to see so many colleagues from the business school here together with the Smith School. And of course, you being, invited by the business school, but very much, in the spirit of the Smith School and spanning and bridging. So we hope you'll be visiting us also a little bit more over the coming weeks here to come. So I'm just very happy, to have you here on the stage, Tima, and for reminding us what we're here for. Thank you for an amazing talk, and let's continue the dialogue outside. Thank you.
Thank you.